This is chapter 2-7, and we're going to be talking about absolute values today. Absolute value is the distance a number is away from 0 on the number line. It is a distance. Therefore, can distance ever be negative? No, distance is always positive because I cannot take a ruler or a tape measure and have a negative value on there, can I? It's always a positive value. So with that said, if I plug and chug into this, what is the absolute value of -5? In other words, how many units away from 0 is -5? 5. What is the absolute value of 0? And what is the absolute value of +5? Now, if I graph this, what I'm going to get is the point 0, 0, the point 5, 5, and the point -5, 5. And if you connect these, you are going to get this lovely shape of a V. Do we all understand that? That means that every absolute value is in the shape of a V. A V for valley or a mountain. Okay? Now, with that said, we have a whole bunch of information that I want to make sure that you highlight on your laptops today. All right? Chapter 2-7, or you can write it down. I do not care which. The first thing you need to know is the general form of an equation. This, A times the absolute value of x minus h plus k, is the general form of absolute value. The A gives us a lot of information. The first thing it tells us is that A is going to be the stretch or compress of the function. What in the world does that mean? Well, whenever we've talked about lines, we've always talked about the slope of a line, correct? The slope is the steepness of the line. The bigger the number, the steeper the slope, correct? The smaller the number, such as a fraction, the flatter the slope. Would you all agree with me? Hello? Okay. Now with that said, those same concepts, flat and steep, are going to become new terms, and those new terms are going to be called stretch or compress. Now, if this is my lovely standard V, you all with me? This is my standard V. If I tell you to stretch, what are you guys going to do? If I tell you guys right now, you're sitting down, I tell you to stretch, what are you going to do? You're going to go like this, and you're going to stretch all the way up. If I tell you to stretch your body out, instinctively, you're trying to make yourself longer, right? Okay? Well, that's what we're going to do with my arm. So if I stretch, that means my slope is going to get steeper. Does that make sense? If I tell you to compress, for example, compress the trash, what happens to the trash? You push it down, right? So my arms are going to go out. Does that make sense? Now, what I refer to this as is a travel mug versus a cereal bowl, okay? A travel mug has to be long and skinny in order to be able to fit into a cup holder, right? So that's a stretch. Does that make sense? Long, skinny, stretch, travel mug. Make sense? Whenever I want to compress, I turn into a fat, stocky cereal bowl. Does that make sense? You see it? Okay. We are not going to eat cereal out of this. We're going to eat out of a big bowl, right? So a compress is going to be a lovely little fraction, and a stretch is going to be a big number such as 5, 7, 2, 3. You with me? Now, this is what we call the slope of our V. A is also known as our slope, okay? A is responsible for a lot of information. For what you need to know about it today is that we're going to be graphing V's, which are valleys, or our mountains, okay? The next thing you need to know about is going to be our horizontal shift. Our horizontal shift is taking this V and literally moving left or right with it. Nothing changes. The shape stays exactly the same. I am simply moving left or right. Does that make sense? Now, the K value is going to be what we call the vertical shift. The vertical shift is going to what moves it up or down. You with me? Up or down. Every time. I am not changing anything about it. I am simply moving it up or down. So H moves it left and right. K moves it up and down. This creates what we have as a vertex. In other words, this is where we have a maximum point or a minimum point. Maximum points mean I am at a top of a what? Mountain. I went up the mountain, and then what happened at the vertex? At the maximum point. I then change direction, and I go down the mountain. So this is going to be the highest or the lowest point, and it's going to be where the graph changes directions. So at my maximum, I'm going to be changing directions, and I'm going to be having to go from increasing, change direction, down to decreasing. If I'm a valley, I have a minimum point, correct? And again, I'm going down the mountain. I should say I'm going down into the valley. I get to the bottom of the valley, and then I go back up the valley. Does that make sense? Okay? And then the last thing you need to know about is what we call the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is basically a vertical line, and all vertical lines are in the equation of x equals a number. In this case, it's going to be x equals h. Why is it x equals h? Because this is going to be the x-coordinate of my vertex. An axis of symmetry says if I have my v, where can I fold this vertically so that the right arm of my graph lands directly on the left arm of my graph? Does that make sense? And if you look at me right now, my lovely little arms are held up in the air, and what I have is my body becomes the axis of symmetry. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, what's the next thing we need to talk about is the A value. The A value, I told you, has a lot of information in it. The first thing that it is that you need to understand is it is the slope. It is the slope. So, so, so important that you understand that this is the slope. Okay? If it is smaller than 0, meaning it's negative, if my A value is negative, you know what happens to my valley? It's reflected and it turns into a what? A mountain. And now has a maximum because it's reflected. Okay? It now has a maximum and it becomes reflected. Now, if A is greater than 0, then it's just how we typically know it has a minimum value and it looks like a valley. Okay? Now, we talked about this a little bit ago whenever we had our previous slide, and we said, well, what if A is a fraction? Well, what is A known as? What was the first thing that you highlighted on this page? A is known as the what? Slope. So if it's the slope, then it's going to have a steep slope or it's going to have a flat slope, which means it's either the stretch or the compress factor, right? So if this is a fraction, is a fraction going to be a whole number? No, whenever I say fraction, I mean a fraction is a number between 0 and 1. Does that make sense? 2/3, 4/7, 5/8. If it is one of those fractional numbers, what's happening is we are compressing it because we have a very small slope. It's a flat slope. Does that make sense? It's not very steep. If it is a whole number or a number larger than 1, it is going to be a stretch, meaning it is a travel mug. Do we understand that? Okay. Now, I want you to tell me what is happening to each one of these absolute value graphs. Remember, the plus k at the end, what happens to the function of the plus k? The k did what to the function? H did something to it and k did something to it. What did H do to it? H moved it left and right, k moved it up and down. So how many units has this thing moved which direction? I moved it up k units. What about the next one? I moved it down how many units? K units. Now, this is a formula, and this is opposite of what you think it is. How many of you think that this thing would go to the left H units? Everybody wants to say that it goes to the left, but it does not go to the left. It goes the opposite direction, which means it's going which direction? To the right 8 units, or H units, sorry. The next one, what's happening here? It's going to the left, very good. It's the opposite of what you think. And now let's put this together and tell me what's happening to this equation right here. It's going to the left H units. And it's going up K units. Now, I gave everybody graph paper, did I not? Perfect. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and skip the first example. We're going to do the second example together. So the first example we're going to do is y equals negative 2/3 times the absolute value of x plus 2 minus 1. Okay, the first thing I want you to locate is the a value. What is my a value? My a value is going to be negative 2/3. Well, first of all, what does that mean? It's negative. It's negative, which means what? Okay, I've heard to compress. You're right. So the first thing you guys are seeing that it's compressed. Okay. It's compressed because it's a fraction. Perfect. What else? What's the negative mean? The negative means that it is going to be reflected, meaning instead of a valley, what am I going to have? I'm going to have a mountain. Because this thing is going to open down. Do we understand that? Which means, do I have a maximum or do I have a minimum? I'm going to have a maximum, correct? Do we understand that, yes or no? The negative means that it's going to change the direction and now becomes a mountain. The 2/3 means that it's compressed, meaning it looks like a cereal bowl. It's going to be really fat, right? And the fact that it's a mountain says that I'm going to have a maximum value. Do we all understand that there? Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is how to get our h value. So to get our h value and our axis of symmetry, what we're going to do is we're going to take the junk inside the bars, which is 3x, which is x plus 2, I'm sorry. And we're going to set that equal to 0. So you're going to take the junk that's in the bars, and you're going to set that equal to 0. And you're going to solve it. So if I solve that, I have x is equal to negative 2. If you box that in, this is what we call our axis of symmetry. That is our axis of symmetry. If you recall, our axis of symmetry was the equation x equals h. So what would that imply that h is in this scenario? It's going to be negative 2. Now, I heard something very, very important there. Santana, what did you say? You think it's going to the right, but which direction is it actually going? It's going to the left 2 units, and then what? It's going to go down 1 unit. Do we understand that? Okay? So now, from my h, I now can get the next thing I need, which is my k, and we said negative 1. So what is my vertex of this lovely little V or mountain? What's my vertex? HK. What's my vertex? HK. Negative 2, negative 1. So now that's my vertex. Okay, well that's all beautiful. Okay, we found our A value. We found our axis of symmetry. We found our vertex. And the last thing we need to do is we need to be able to graph this. So the way we're going to graph this is we're going to find our slope. Our slope is calculated by taking our A value and multiplying it by our leading coefficient. What's a leading coefficient? Leading coefficient is the number attached to the x by multiplication. So what you're multiplying together is going to be this value right here and this value right here attached to the x by multiplication. So what is my A value? Negative 2/3. And what is my leading coefficient? What is attached to this x by multiplication? A 1. The phantom 1 is there. Do y'all see that? It's the phantom 1. So this is going to give me negative 2/3. So if that gives me negative 2/3, right, What is the graphical definition of slope? Rise over run. Now, what are we trying to make here? Are we trying to make a mountain or a valley? We're trying to make a mountain. So if we want the literal definition, we want rise over run. So instead of rising, what am I actually going to be doing? I'm going to be falling down 2 units, and I'm going to run to the right 3 units, and I'm going to run to the left 3 units. Why am I running left and right 3 units? I'm making a mountain. If I only go one direction, I will only get one side of my mountain. So I have to go both left and right. Yes? Tristan, do you agree with me? It's beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to graph this. So we start by graphing what? Can't use the slope until we graph a point first. And what's the point we need to graph? Your vertex. So let's first graph our vertex. So we're going to graph the point -2, -1. -2, -1 puts me there. And from there, am I a mountain or am I a valley? I'm a mountain, which means this is the highest point that I can have, right? So from here, I need to go down 2 units and then to the right 3. 1, 2, 3. Down 2 units and to the right 3. Down 2 units and to the right 3. Do you see the one arm of my lovely absolute value? Okay, now I did the right-hand arm, so now what arm do I need to do? The left, so I'm going to go down 2 units, and this time to the left 3. Down 2 units and to the left 3. Down 2 units and to the left 3. And we're going to connect these. Do you see your V? Now tell me, how do I do my axis of symmetry? My axis of symmetry is going to be where I can fold this thing down the center and the right and left hand arm land directly on top of each other. That is going to be at x equals h, which is going to be right there at x equals -2. Do we all understand that? And please draw that as a dotted line. Okay? Do we all understand that? So now let's do it again. Next example. Y equals 2 times the absolute value of 3x plus 12 minus 1. So step 1, what did we find first in the last example? Our A value. So what is my A value here? A is going to be 2. So what does that mean? First of all, is it positive or negative? It's positive. So if it's positive, do I have a valley or do I have a mountain? I have a valley. Very good. Which means if I have a valley, do I have a maximum or do I have a minimum? I have a minimum point. And because I have A equaling a 2, is that going to be a stretch, meaning a travel mug, or is that going to be a compress, meaning a cereal bowl? That's going to be a stretch. Is it opening up or is it opening down? It opens up. Got a lot of information from A, didn't we? Does that make sense? Okay. I can have a snapshot in my mind of what this thing should look like now, don't I? Okay, the next thing I need to find is going to be my H. So how do I find my H value along with my axis of symmetry? Take whatever's inside your absolute value bars and set it equal to 0. So 3x plus 12 is equal to 0. Subtract the 12 and divide by 3. What is that? X equals -4. What is it? It represents 2 things. It's my axis of symmetry, and what else is it? It says that H is -4, correct? So if H is -4, what can you tell me about K? K is your vertical shift, which means I went down 1 unit, so that's going to be -1. What do I get out of all of that? I get my vertex. And what is my vertex? That's the point HK. Very good. Okay, after I did that, what do I do next? Find your slope. Your slope is found by multiplying two values together. It's multiplying your A value together and multiplying your leading coefficient. So the two values I'm multiplying together is the value 2 and this value attached to the x, which is going to be what? 3. Very good. So I'm going to be multiplying 2 times 3, which gives me the value 6. Put that over 1 and make that a fraction. Why are we making that a fraction? Because this represents my slope, correct? So you tell me if that's my slope and I want it to be a valley, what do I need to do? I need to go up 6 units and left and right 1 unit. Do we understand that? So go to your graph paper, please. And what's the first thing that I graph? I need to graph my vertex, which would be -4, -1. From there, what do? I go up 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and to the right one. And I'm also going to go to the left one since it's only up 6 units there. Do we see that? And then I can do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Puts me there, puts me there. And I connect those. It's a very steep V, isn't it? Very stretched, okay? Now what's the last thing that I'm missing? Axis of symmetry, which is going to be x equals -4, dotted vertical line. Okay? Last example to make sure that you guys get it for the graphing part. FYI, folks, this is not easy material. There's a lot going on in this lesson. Y is equal to -3 times the absolute value of 2x plus 6 minus 1. Okay, talk to me. What's the first thing we find? A value. And what is my A value? Okay, my A value is -3. So if my A value is -3, what does that tell me? It's negative. It becomes a mountain now because it's going to be opening which direction? Do I have a max or a min? I have a max. And is it stretched or compressed? Stretched. Why is it stretched? Because it's a number larger than 1. It's a number larger than 1. Y'all with me? Okay, after we find our A value, what am I looking for next? My H value and my axis of symmetry. How do I find that? Take the junk inside the absolute value and set it equal to 0, please. Now what? I am going to subtract 6, so 2x is equal to -6. Divide by 2, x is equal to -3. Box that in. What is that? This is your axis of symmetry, and h is equal to -3. So now what's k, folks? -1. Good job. What do I get out of my vertex? What is my vertex now? K is not always -1. For some odd reason, it just happens to be -1 in this case, in the last two examples. I didn't mean for it to be. How do you find K? It's whatever is attached at the very end for face value, okay? So what is my vertex? -3, -1. Okay, now that it's -3, -1, Now what? Find your slope. How do we find a slope again? A value times your leading coefficient, right? So that's going to be -3 times what? So that's going to be -3 times 2, which gives me -6/1, correct? So what does that mean? I go down 6 and I go left and right 1. Yes? So from here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to graph. What point do I graph first? And what is my vertex? -3, -1. From there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the right 1, to the left 1. There's my graph, and my axis of symmetry is right there. Do we all understand how to graph absolute value? You have 9 problems like that tonight. Now, we're going to do one problem here to get you ready for the next thing. The next thing is going to be working backwards. Working backwards. Now, when we graphed, what did we graph first? The vertex. So what do I need to locate first? So what's my vertex? -1, 4. So my vertex is going to be -1, 4, which means that's my H and my K. Do you all agree? Okay. So now, when we graphed, we used our slope, didn't we? So I need to find 2 other points on here, or another point on here, and I need to find the slope. So my slope, which is my A value, is going to be up 1 unit, and then rising or running to the left 3 units. So my slope is 1/3. But is it a mountain or is it a valley? So since it's a mountain, what does that say about my A value? That it is -1/3. So that means I go back to my standard general form and I plug in what I know. And what I know is A, H, and K now, don't I? And I plug it in. So that's going to give me y is equal to -1/3, absolute value of x, minus a -1 plus 4. What is minus a negative? So the equation that I want to see is y equals -1/3, x plus 1 plus 4. That is the equation. I'm going to do one more since I still have time. Okay, again, what did we find first? The vertex. So what's my vertex here? 2, 4, 5, 1. So my vertex is going to be 5, 1, and that's going to give me HK, correct? Now what did we do next? Find your slope. So I'm going to take this point right here, and my A value, is it a mountain or a valley? Mountain, so does that mean is it positive or negative? Negative. So I'm going to go up 1, 2 units, and I'm going to run 1. So what's my A value? -2. So now plug it into your equation. And that's going to give me y is equal to -2, absolute value of x minus 5 plus 1. You have 3 of those tonight. So you have a total of 12 problems. 9 of them are graphing. You have exactly 9 graphs left on your graph paper. And 3 of them are working backwards to find the equation. Any questions over tonight's homework? No, you don't have to graph because they give you the graph. Okay? All right.